Dean Vexthala's crystal body flickered with nervous energy as she stared at the application on her holographic desk. In her 300 years of running Zephyrian Prime University, she had never seen anything like this. The document came from a planet called Earth, a world the Galactic Educational Consortium had classified as a class, 12 Deathworld. The application belonged to someone named Jake Morrison. He was 22 years old and wanted to study engineering. His academic records were impressive, but that was not what made Vexthala's crystalline form pulse with anxiety. It was where he came from. Earth was a nightmare planet. The reports she had read described a world of constant danger. The gravity was crushing. The atmosphere contained a toxic gas called oxygen that could cause fires. The surface was covered with vast amounts of deadly liquid water. Violent storms raged across the continents. The planet even had massive fusion reactors in its sky that could burn living tissue. And somehow, intelligent life had evolved there. The beings from Earth called themselves humans. Every species in the galaxy knew about them, but only through horror stories. They were said to be violent creatures that fought each other for fun. They supposedly ate other living beings and drank poison for pleasure. Most terrifying of all, they were rumored to be nearly indestructible. Vexthala touched the communication panel on her desk. "Assistant Quill, please ask the admission board to meet me immediately." Within minutes, 5 beings materialized in her office through various forms of transport. Professor Yen from the peaceful floating gardens of Serenity 7 appeared as a glowing ball of soft light. Dr. Clicks from the underground Harmony Caves clicked his way in on 6 delicate legs. The others were equally fragile representatives of the galaxy's most civilized species. "You called this emergency meeting because of an application?" Professor Yenta's voice was like gentle wind chimes. "Surely you can handle routine paperwork yourself, Dean." Vexthala projected the application into the center of the room. "This is not routine. Look at the planetary classification." The silence that followed was heavy. Dr. Clix's antennae twitched nervously. "Class 12 Deathworld? There must be some mistake. Beings from such places do not pursue higher education. They are too busy surviving." "That was my first thought as well," Vexthala replied. "But I have verified the information 3 times. This Jake Morrison has completed what humans call high school and something called college. His grades translate to exceptional performance in mathematics, physics, and engineering." Professor Yenta's light dimmed. "Even if his academic record is real, we cannot allow a Deathworlder on campus. Think of the other students. They will be terrified." "I have considered this," Vexthala said. "However, our university charter specifically states that we cannot discriminate based on planetary origin. The Galactic Educational Consortium requires us to consider all qualified applicants." Dr. Clicks made a sound like grinding stone. "Surely there are exceptions for dangerous species. What if this human becomes violent? What if it attacks our students?" Vexthala had wondered the same thing. She had spent days researching everything she could find about humans. The information was contradictory and confusing. Some reports described them as savage beasts. Others suggested they were capable of surprising gentleness. A few sources even claimed they could be reasoned with. "According to my research," she said carefully, "humans do possess higher intelligence. They have developed technology, art, and science. They have even achieved space travel, though they have not yet joined the galactic community." "Technology means nothing," Professor Yent argued. "Even primitive species can develop weapons. The question is whether they can control their violent nature in a civilized environment." Vexthala looked around the room at her colleagues. Each of them represented species that had evolved on peaceful worlds. They had never faced real danger or hardship. The idea of a being that had survived on a death world was beyond their understanding. "I have made my decision," she announced. "We will accept Jake Morrison's application." The reaction was immediate. Dr. Clicks fell over in shock. Professor Yenta's light flashed red. The other board members began speaking at once, their voices mixing into a chorus of panic. "You cannot be serious." Dr. Clicks wheezed from the floor. "This will destroy the university's reputation. No civilized species will send their children here if they know a Deathworlder is on campus. We have protocols to follow," Vextala said firmly. And perhaps it is time we learn something new. This Jake Morrison will be an experiment in interspecies education. If he proves dangerous, we will remove him. If not, we may discover that our assumptions about Deathworlders are wrong. Professor Yent pulsed weakly. What if he kills someone? Then we will deal with that situation if it arises, Vextala replied. But I refuse to discriminate against a qualified applicant based on fear and prejudice. As the board members filed out of her office in various states of distress, Vextala composed the acceptance message. She wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her career. In a few weeks, the first Deathworlder in galactic history would walk through the doors of Zephyrian Prime University. She just hoped the campus would survive the experience. The atmospheric shuttle landed with a soft hiss on the university's main platform. Jake Morrison stepped out and stretched his arms above his head, working out the kinks from the long journey through space. The artificial gravity on the shuttle had been set too low for his comfort, making him feel like he was floating the entire trip. He looked around the campus and whistled softly. The buildings were beautiful, made of some kind of crystal that caught the light of the three suns overhead. Floating gardens drifted between the structures, and walkways made of what looked like solidified air connected everything together. It was definitely fancier than his old college back on Earth. Jake picked up his single duffel bag and started walking toward the main building. He wore his usual clothes, blue jeans, work boots, and a plain gray t-shirt. His mother had told him to dress nicely for his first day, but this was as nice as he got unless someone was getting married or buried. As he walked, he noticed something strange. The few alien students he could see were moving away from him. At first he thought it was coincidence, but then he realized they were actually running. A group of what looked like floating jellyfish creatures saw him coming and immediately flew in the opposite direction. Jake shrugged. Maybe they were late for class. He found the physics building and located room 247, where his first class was supposed to meet. The door was made of the same crystal material as everything else, and it slid open when he approached. Inside, he saw about 30 students of various alien species sitting in seats that looked more like nests or pods in regular chairs. Professor Quill Mint floated at the front of the room. She looked like a jellyfish too, but bigger, with soft blue light pulsing through her transparent body. When Jake walked in, her light flickered rapidly. "Good morning," Jake said cheerfully, giving a small wave to the class. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. 3 small furry creatures in the front row fell out of their seats and lay twitching on the floor. A lizard-like being made a sound like a fire alarm and ran for the exit. The jellyfish students clustered together in the back corner, their lights flashing in what Jake assumed was some kind of panic signal. Jake stopped walking and looked around confused. Sorry, am I in the wrong room? This is theoretical physics, right?" Professor Quillmint's voice came out as a trembling whisper. "You are Jake Morrison. The human?" "Yeah, that's me." Jake smiled, not realizing that showing his teeth was making everything worse. "Nice to meet you, Professor." More students fled the room. By now, only about half the class remained, and they had all pressed themselves against the far wall, as if Jake was some kind of dangerous animal. Professor Quillmint floated backward until she was also against the wall. "Please, take any seat you wish. Do not feel obligated to follow our seating customs." Jake looked at the strange, nest-like chairs and picked one near the middle of the room. It was clearly not designed for humans, but he managed to squeeze into it. The moment he sat down, the remaining students moved even further away. "So," Jake said, trying to break the awkward silence, "what are we learning about today?" Professor Quillmint's light pulsed weakly. "We are discussing the theoretical applications of gravity manipulation in nonviolent civilizations." Jake pulled out a notebook and pen from his bag. Several students made startled noises when they saw the pen, as if he had drawn a weapon. "Sounds interesting. I read about gravity manipulation in some of your textbooks. You guys are using the Henderson-Kozlov equations, right?" The professor's light stopped pulsing entirely. "You are familiar with Henderson-Kozlov theoretical mathematics?" "Sure, basic stuff. Though I think there might be an error in the third equation. The way you guys have it written, it would create a feedback loop that would make the gravity field unstable." Professor Quillmint floated closer, apparently forgetting her fear in the face of academic curiosity. What do you mean? Jake stood up to write on the holographic board at the front of the room. The moment he moved, every remaining student screamed and ran for the exits. Within seconds, Jake and Professor Quillmint were alone in the classroom. Jake looked around at the empty room and sighed. Does this happen a lot here? Professor Quillmint's light was pulsing rapidly again, but now it seemed more like excitement than fear. No one has ever questioned the Henderson-Kozlov equations before. They are fundamental to our understanding of gravity manipulation. Well, math is math, Jake replied, starting to write on the board. If you run the numbers, you can see the problem right here. As Jake worked through the mathematical proof, Professor Quillmint watched in fascination. The human's casual discussion of complex theoretical physics was impressive enough, but what amazed her more was how he moved. Every gesture was controlled and precise, despite his obviously immense physical strength. He wrote on the board with the same delicate touch she would use to handle fragile crystal. When Jake finished his explanation, Professor Quillmint was silent for a long moment. Your analysis is correct, she finally whispered. The equations do contain a fundamental flaw. But how did you see this so quickly? Jake shrugged. I guess I just look at things differently. Back on Earth, we have to deal with a lot of unstable systems. You learn to spot problems before they blow up in your face. Professor Quillmint realized she was witnessing something unprecedented. This was not the savage beast the reports had described. This was a being with a fundamentally different way of thinking, shaped by surviving on a world where mistakes could be fatal. Mr. Morrison, she said carefully, would you be willing to continue this discussion? I believe your perspective could be very valuable to our research. Jake smiled again, and this time Professor Quillmint did not flinch at the sight of his teeth. Sure, I'd love to, but maybe next time we can get through a whole class without everyone running away. As they talked, neither of them noticed a small crowd of security personnel gathering outside the classroom, having been alerted by the mass exodus of terrified students. Word was already spreading across campus that the human had done something that caused an entire class to flee in panic. The legend of Jake Morrison was beginning to grow. Dr. Zixandra had heard the rumors spreading across campus like wildfire. The human had somehow made an entire physics class flee in terror. But Professor Quillmint was telling a very different story. According to her, the Deathworlder had solved a problem that had puzzled their department for months. Zixandra floated through the university library on her personal anti-gravity platform, her 6 arms typing notes into multiple data tablets at once. As one of the leading physicists from the floating cities of Nimbus 7, she prided herself on logical thinking over emotional reactions. If this human truly understood advanced mathematics, she needed to see the proof for herself. She found Jake Morrison sitting alone at a table in the back corner of the library. He was reading from an actual physical book, which was strange enough. Most species had moved to digital learning centuries ago, but what made her pause was the book itself. It was a graduate-level quantum mechanics textbook that weighed nearly 30 pounds. Jake was holding it up with one hand, while taking notes with the other. Zixandra activated her portable energy barrier and cautiously approached. The barrier would protect her if the human suddenly became violent, but it would also allow her to observe him safely. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice amplified through the barrier speakers. "You are Jake Morrison, the human student." Jake looked up and smiled. "Yeah, that's me. Are you Dr. Zixandra? Professor Quillmint mentioned you might want to talk about the gravity equations." Zixandra was surprised by his calm, friendly tone. "I am indeed Dr. Zixandra. I understand you found an error in the Henderson-Kozlov equations." "Not really an error," Jake said, setting down the heavy textbook as if it weighed nothing. "More like an incomplete solution. The math works fine for stable systems, but breaks down when you add real-world variables." Zixandra pulled up the equations on her tablet and projected them into the air between them. "Show me what you mean." Jake stood up and walked closer to projection. Zixandra tensed, ready to increase her barrier's power. But Jake simply pointed to one of the formulas. "See this part here? It assumes perfect conditions. But in the real world, you always have interference. Magnetic fields, solar radiation, gravitational anomalies. The equation needs to account for chaos variables. As Jake explained his reasoning, Zixander found herself leaning forward, fascinated despite her fear. His approach to the problem was completely different from anything she had seen before. Where her people looked for elegant, harmonious solutions, Jake was thinking about everything that could go wrong. "You think like an engineer," she observed. "I am an engineer," Jake replied. "Well, studying to be one anyway. Back on Earth, if you design something that breaks, people can die. So you always plan for the worst-case scenario." Zixandra had never heard of such a philosophy. In her civilization, technology was designed to work in perfect harmony with natural forces. The idea of planning for failure was foreign to her. "What do you mean people can die?" Jake looked surprised by the question. "Well, if you build a bridge and your calculations are wrong, the bridge falls down and kills everyone on it. If you design a spaceship and forget about radiation shielding, the crew gets cooked. Basic stuff like that." The casual way Jake talked about death and destruction made Zixander's protective instincts flare. But she forced herself to think scientifically. This human came from a world where mistakes had immediate, deadly consequences. Of course, his approach to problem-solving would be different. "Show me how you would modify the Henderson-Kozlov equations," she said. Jake picked up his pen and started writing in the air, the projection recording his marks. As he worked, Zixandra noticed something that made her pause. The pen he was using was made of metal and had a sharp point. To her people, it would be considered a dangerous weapon. But Jake handled it with the same gentle precision he had shown with equations. When Jake finished his modifications, Zixandra ran the new calculations through her tablet. The results were remarkable. The modified equations not only solved the original problem, but also predicted several potential failure modes that her people had never considered. "This is extraordinary work," she whispered. "But how did you learn to think this way?" Jake shrugged. "Growing up on Earth, I guess. Everything there is trying to kill you, so you learn to expect trouble. Weather, earthquakes, wild animals, even the bacteria in the water can be dangerous. You develop a healthy respect for Murphy's Law." "What is Murphy's Law?" "Anything that can go wrong will go wrong," Jake explained. "So you always have backup plans." Zixandra stared at him through her energy barrier. This human lived on a world where the environment itself was hostile, where even microscopic life could be deadly. Yet instead of making him savage, it had made him incredibly careful and thorough. His primitive approach to engineering was actually more advanced than anything her civilization had developed. "Mr. Morrison," she said slowly, "would you be willing to collaborate on a research project? I believe your perspective could revolutionize our understanding of practical physics applications." Jake grinned. "Sure, sounds fun. But can we lose the force field? It's kind of hard to work together when you're hiding behind a wall." Zixandra hesitated. Every instinct told her that lowering her defenses around a Deathworlder was suicide. But her scientific curiosity was stronger than her fear. Slowly, she deactivated the energy barrier. Nothing happened. Jake did not attack or threaten her. He simply pulled out a chair and gestured for her to sit down. "Great," he said. "Now, let me show you some other problems I noticed in your stellar engineering textbooks. You guys are way too optimistic about solar flare protection." As they worked together, Zixandra realized she was witnessing something historic. For the first time in galactic history, a Deathworlder and a civilized species were collaborating as equals. And the results were going to change everything. Across the library, other students watched from a safe distance, amazed to see someone actually sitting near the terrifying human without dying. Word began to spread that perhaps the monster was not quite what they had expected. Dr. Yelnarov floated into her peaceful conflict resolution classroom with a sense of purpose. The delicate, flower-like alien had been teaching stress management and nonviolent problem solving for over 50 years. Her techniques were so effective that students from across the galaxy came to learn her methods. Today, she had a special demonstration planned. The human student, Jake Morrison, was enrolled in her class, and she intended to use him as a perfect example of primitive aggression versus civilized behavior. Jake walked into the classroom and looked around for somewhere to sit. The other students immediately moved to the far side of the room, creating a wide empty space around him. He chose a chair that creaked worryingly under his weight and pulled out his notebook. "Welcome, students," Dr. Yelnar began, her voice like gentle wind through flower petals. "Today we will explore how different species handle stressful situations. We will use our simulation chamber to observe natural reactions to conflict." She gestured to a large crystal dome in the center of the room. The simulation chamber could create realistic scenarios for students to practice their conflict resolution skills. "Mr. Morrison," Dr. Yelnara said sweetly, "would you volunteer to demonstrate for the class? This will help everyone understand the difference between civilized responses and more primitive reactions." Jake looked up from his notes. "Sure, I don't mind helping out." The other students gasped as Jake walked into the simulation chamber. Dr. Yelnara sealed the dome and activated the monitoring equipment. Sensors would measure Jake's stress levels, heart rate, and emotional responses to the scenario she was about to create. "The situation is simple," Dr. Yelnara announced to class. "Mr. Morrison has ordered food at a restaurant, but when it arrives, it is incorrect. He ordered a vegetable dish, but received a meat dish instead." She activated the simulation. Inside the dome, a holographic waiter appeared and set down a plate of food in front of Jake. The scenario was designed to be mildly frustrating, enough to trigger a stress response in most species. Jake looked at the plate and shrugged. "Excuse me," he said politely to the holographic waiter. "I think there's been a mix-up. I ordered the vegetable plate, but this looks like meat." The holographic waiter, programmed to be unhelpful, replied, "Sorry, the kitchen is too busy to make a new dish. This is what you get." Dr. Yelnara watched her monitoring equipment, expecting to see Jake's stress levels spike. Instead, the reading showed barely any change at all. Jake looked at the meat dish again and smiled. "No problem. This looks good too. Thanks anyway." Dr. Yelnara blinked her large eyes in confusion. The simulation was designed to cause stress. Every other species showed significant anxiety when faced with the scenario. She decided to increase the difficulty. Suddenly, loud noises began playing in the chamber. Bright lights flashed overhead. The temperature started to rise. A second holographic figure appeared and began arguing loudly with the first waiter. The students watching from outside the chamber covered their ears and closed their eyes. Even the mild version of the simulation they could see and hear was causing them distress. Inside the chamber, Jake continued eating the wrong meal as if nothing had happened. He seemed completely unbothered by the chaos around him. "Interesting," he commented to no one in particular. "This reminds me of the cafeteria during finals week back home." Dr. Yelnara stared at her instruments. Jake's stress levels had actually gone down. His heart rate was steady. His brain patterns showed he was relaxed and maybe even slightly amused. She cranked up the simulation to maximum difficulty. Now the chamber was filled with blaring sirens, strobing lights, multiple holographic figures shouting at each other, and the temperature fluctuating wildly. The scenario that would send most aliens to the hospital was fully active. Jake finished his meal and looked around at the chaos with mild interest. "You know," he said conversationally, "this is actually way less stressful than finals week. At least nobody is asking me to solve calculus problems while this is happening." The monitoring equipment started smoking. The stress sensors, designed to measure anxiety levels up to what the aliens considered maximum survivable levels, could not process Jake's impossibly low readings. Dr. Yelnara quickly shut down the simulation. Jake stepped out of the chamber looking completely normal, not even slightly upset or tired. "That was fun," he said cheerfully. "Kind of like a low-level sensory experience. Do you want me to try it again with different settings?" The classroom was dead silent. Every student was staring at Jake as if he was some kind of supernatural being. Dr. Yelnara's flower-like petals were wilted with shock. "How?" she whispered. "How did you remain calm during that ordeal?" Jake looked confused. "Calm during what? Oh, you mean the lights and noise? That was nothing. I grew up in New York City. This was quieter than my morning commute." Dr. Yelnara tried to process this information. The human had grown up in an environment more chaotic than her maximum stress simulation, what she considered torture. He considered a quiet Tuesday. But the food was wrong, she said weakly. You should have been upset about the incorrect order. Jake shrugged. Life's too short to get worked up over small stuff. Besides, I was hungry and the food was fine. Sometimes you just have to roll with it. One student, a nervous rabbit-like creature named Pipsqueak, raised a trembling paw. But what if the food had been poisonous? Well, then I would have asked him to call a doctor. Jake replied reasonably. But it was just meat instead of vegetables. Not really a big deal. Dr. Yelnara realized her entire understanding of stress and conflict was based on species that had never faced real danger. Jake's calm response was not primitive or aggressive. It was a reaction of someone who had learned to save his energy for actual threats. Mr. Morrison, she said slowly, perhaps you could teach us about how humans handle truly stressful situations. Jake thought for a moment. Sure, but you might want to start with something smaller. Maybe we could role-play a scenario like running out of coffee on a Monday morning or getting stuck in traffic when you're already late for work. The students looked at each other in terror. If those were small, stressful situations, what did humans consider truly dangerous? As the class ended, Dr. Yelnara knew she would need to completely revise her curriculum. Everything she thought she knew about stress management had just been turned upside down by a human who treated chaos like background noise. Professor Kethmoto scuttled into a xenobiology laboratory on 8 spindly legs, his excitement barely contained. The insect-like professor had spent his entire career studying alien life forms, but he had never had the chance to examine a Deathworlder up close. When Jake Morrison volunteered to participate in a research study, Kethmoto nearly fainted from joy. Jake sat on a reinforced examination table, looking relaxed while surrounded by dozens of scanning devices and monitoring equipment. The machines hummed and beeped as they collected data about his biology. This is fascinating, Kethmoto chittered, his mandibles clicking rapidly as he read the results. Your bone density is 3 times higher than any species we have on record. Your muscle fibers are incredibly dense. And your cardiovascular system, it is like nothing we have ever seen. Is that good or bad? Jake asked, swinging his legs casually. The movement made the heavy table shake, which caused several delicate instruments to rattle alarmingly. It is remarkable, Professor Kethmoto replied. According to these readings, you could survive in gravitational fields that would crush most of our students into paste. The atmospheric pressure on your homeworld would collapse the lungs of any civilized species. Jake nodded. Yeah, Earth's pretty heavy compared to most places I've visited. Takes some getting used to when you travel off-world. Everything feels so light and fragile. Professor Kethmoto pulled up a holographic display showing Jake's vital signs. Your resting heart rate indicates you are completely relaxed, yet your physical capabilities are extraordinary. Tell me, what do humans do for exercise? Oh, all kinds of stuff, Jake said. Running, swimming, lifting weights, playing sports. I used to run about 5 miles every morning before classes. The professor's compound eyes widened. You ran 5 miles for pleasure? Sure, it's good for you. Keeps you in shape and clears your head before starting the day. Professor Kethmoto quickly calculated the distance. 5 miles was further than most aliens could travel in an emergency evacuation. And this was daily? Monday through Friday usually. Weekends I might go for a longer run, maybe 10 or 12 miles if the weather was nice. Professor Kethmoto had to sit down. His species considered walking a quarter mile to be significant exercise. The idea of running 12 miles voluntarily was incomprehensible. What about swimming? The professor asked weakly. Love swimming, Jake said enthusiastically. Used to swim in the ocean back home. Great workout, and the waves make it fun. Ocean? Professor Kethmoto's voice was barely a whisper. You voluntarily entered large bodies of water? Well, yeah, swimming pools are fine, but there's nothing like body surfing in the Pacific, though you have to watch out for rip currents and sharks. Professor Kethmoto fell off his chair. Sharks. Jake looked concerned. Are you okay, Professor? You look a little pale. You swam in water that contained predatory animals? Oh, shark attacks are pretty rare, Jake said reassuringly. You're more likely to get struck by lightning. Though I guess that's not very comforting since I've been in thunderstorms, too. Professor Kethmoto decided to change the subject before he had a complete breakdown. Perhaps you could show me some images of your homeworld? Jake pulled out his phone and scrolled through his photo gallery. Sure, here are some pictures from last summer. The first image showed Jake standing on top of a mountain, grinning at the camera with a massive drop visible behind him. Professor Kethmoto made a strangled noise. This is from when I climbed Mount Washington, Jake explained. Great view from the top, though it was pretty windy that day. You climbed a mountain for recreation? Yeah, hiking is popular back home. This one's not too bad, only about 6,000 feet. Some people do Everest, but that's a bit much for me. Professor Kethmoto did not want to know what Everest was. He was already having trouble processing the idea that Jake had voluntarily scaled a 6,000-foot vertical obstacle for fun. The next picture showed Jake in what appeared to be a frozen wasteland, wearing heavy clothing and smiling despite being surrounded by snow and ice. This is from a skiing trip to Colorado. Jake said, Powder was amazing that week. You traveled to a frozen environment for pleasure? Skiing's awesome. There's nothing like racing down a mountain at 40 miles per hour with nothing but 2 pieces of it strapped to your feet. Professor Kethmoto was taking notes frantically, but his hands were shaking too much to write clearly. Every activity Jake described will be considered an extreme survival scenario by galactic standards. Jake swiped to another photo that showed him underwater, surrounded by colorful fish and coral. This is from when I went scuba diving in Australia. The Great Barrier Reef is incredible. You submerge yourself underwater voluntarily? 20 meters down, Jake said proudly. Had to get certified first. Of course. Safety is important when you're that deep. Professor Kethmoto realized that Jake's casual mention of safety protocols was perhaps the most terrifying thing yet. Humans had developed safety standards for activities that would be considered impossible by every other species in the galaxy. Mr. Morrison, the professor said carefully, what would you consider a dangerous activity? Jake thought for a moment. Free climbing without gear, I guess. Or maybe base jumping. Extreme sports can be pretty risky if you don't know what you're doing. Professor Kethmoto decided he did not want to know what those activities involved. He was beginning to understand that humans did not just survive on a death world. They thrived on it. They actively sought out additional challenges for entertainment. One final question, he said. What do humans do to relax? Oh, lots of things. Reading, watching movies, hanging out with friends. Sometimes I like to go camping. Camping? You know, sleeping outside under stars. Getting back to nature. Professor Kethmoto looked at his data again. Humans considered sleeping outdoors, exposed to the elements and potential predators, to be a relaxing vacation activity. As Jake left the laboratory, Professor Kethmoto stared at his research notes. He had learned more about Deathworlder psychology in one afternoon than the galaxy had discovered in centuries. Humans were not just physically tough. They were mentally adapted to treat mortal danger as entertainment. The implications were staggering. If humans ever decided to leave their home world in significant numbers, the galaxy would never be the same. Dean Vexthala's crystalline form flickered with stress patterns as she called the emergency faculty meeting. Her office was packed with representatives from every department. Their various forms of panic filling the room with an atmosphere of barely controlled chaos. We have a situation, she announced, projecting holographic displays around the room. Enrollment applications from Death World species have increased by 400% since Jake Morrison arrived. The Galactic News Network is camped outside our gates, and I have received direct communications from 3 different planetary governments demanding we implement containment protocols. Professor Quillmint floated nervously near the ceiling. Perhaps we should consider their requests. The human has been here only 2 weeks, and already our entire academic structure is in upheaval. Dr. Zixander disagreed. Jake Morrison has contributed more to our research in 2 weeks than most graduate students do in 2 years. His insights into practical physics applications could revolutionize our understanding of engineering. Professor Kethmoto chittered anxiously from his corner. The biological data I have collected suggests that humans are not anomalies. They represent an entire species adapted to conditions we consider impossible. If more arrive, we will need to completely redesign our infrastructure. Dean Vexthala dimmed her light thoughtfully. Outside her office, she could see Jake walking across the quad with two other students. For the first time since he had arrived, he was not alone. The strange trio made their way to the library. Jake walked in the middle, his heavy footsteps making the ground vibrate slightly. On his left was Pipsqueak, a small mouse-like creature from Whisperwind Prime, whose entire species communicated in voices too quiet for most beings to hear. On his right was Buzzclicks, an insectoid student whose rapid clicking speech usually gave other species headaches. How did this happen? Dean Vexthala asked herself more than the faculty. The answer had started 3 days earlier. Jake had been sitting alone in the cafeteria, as usual. We noticed Pipsqueak struggling to reach a food dispenser that was designed for taller species. Without thinking, Jake had stood up and gotten the food for him. "Thanks," Pipsqueak had whispered, so quietly that only Jake's enhanced human hearing could pick it up. "No problem," Jake had replied, automatically lowering his voice to match Pipsqueak's volume. "Mind if I sit with you? Gets kind of lonely eating by yourself." Pipsqueak had been amazed. No one else at the university could hear his natural speaking voice. Everyone always asked him to speak louder, which hurt his throat and made him feel uncomfortable. But Jake seemed to have no trouble with quiet conversation. The next day, Buzzclicks had been frantically clicking away at a malfunctioning data terminal, his rapid-fire troubleshooting commentary giving nearby students headaches. Jake had walked over and listened to the clicking pattern. "Sounds like a corrupted data stream." Jake had said, "Try rerouting through the backup channels." Buzzclicks had been shocked. Not only could Jake follow his high-speed technical analysis, but he had correctly diagnosed the problem. For an insectoid species that thought and spoke at accelerated rates, finding someone who could keep up was incredibly rare. Now the three unlikely friends were studying together every day. Jake's human durability made him immune to Buzzclicks' overwhelming energy, while his acute hearing allowed him to communicate easily with Pipsqueak. In return, his new friends helped him navigate the social complexities of galactic university life. "The human is making friends," Dr. Yelnara observed. "This was not predicted in any of our behavioral models." Dean Vexthala watched Jake help Pipsqueak carry a stack of books that would have been impossible for the small creature to manage alone. The gesture was casual and natural, showing no sign of the terrible strength that could crush the delicate being by accident. "He adapts," she said quietly. "Just as his species adapted to survive on a death world, he is adapting to our social environment." Professor Quillmint pulsed nervously. "But what about the applications from other death world species? A Krillian war beast has requested admission to our literature program. A pack hunter from Bloodstone Ridge wants to study our history. How can we possibly accommodate such creatures?" Dean Vexthala turned away from the window. "The same way we accommodated Jake Morrison. We learn, we adapt, and we grow." Dr. Zixander floated forward on her platform. "I have been working with Jake on several research projects. His approach to problem solving is unlike anything we have encountered. Where we see obstacles, he sees puzzles to be solved. Where we see danger, he sees manageable risk. He thinks like a survivor," Professor Kethmoto added. "His species learned to thrive in conditions that would destroy us. Perhaps it is time we learn from that perspective." The room fell silent as the faculty considered this. Through the window, they could see Jake demonstrating something to his friends, moving his hands in careful, precise gestures. Whatever he was explaining, both Pipsqueak and Buzzclicks were listening with rapt attention. Dean Vexthala made her decision. "We will not implement containment protocols. We will not exclude qualified applicants based on their planetary origin. Instead, we will create new programs designed to accommodate different physiological and psychological needs." Professor Quillmint's light flickered with worry. The other civilized species will be outraged. They may withdraw their students. Then they will miss the opportunity to learn something new. Dean Vexthala replied firmly. Jake Morrison has shown us that our assumptions about Deathworlders were wrong. Perhaps our assumptions about education itself need to be reconsidered. As the meeting ended, the faculty filed out in various states of anxiety and excitement. Through the window, Jake's laughter could be heard echoing across the quad as buzz clicks told some kind of joke in rapid clicking sounds. The sound that had once terrified the campus was becoming familiar. Students no longer fled when they heard it. Some even seemed curious about the strange human who had turned their quiet university into something far more interesting. Dean Vexthala remained at her window, watching the three friends head toward their next class. Change was coming to Zephyrian Prime University, whether they were ready or not. She just hoped they could handle what was about to arrive. 6 months had passed since Jake Morrison first walked to the gates of Zephyrian Prime University. The campus looked much the same, but everything else had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Jake sat in the front row of advanced theoretical physics, casually taking notes while Professor Quillmint explained complex equations to a packed classroom. The same professor who had once trembled at his presence now actively sought his input on difficult problems. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "would you share your thoughts on the practical applications of this theorem?" Jake looked up from his notebook. "Well, the math is solid, but in real-world conditions you need to account for temporal fluctuations. The equation assumes perfect stability, but nothing in the universe stays perfectly stable." A student in the back row raised her tentacle. "What do you mean by temporal fluctuations?" "Time doesn't flow evenly everywhere," Jake explained, turning in his chair to address the class. "Gravity affects time. Magnetic fields can cause variations. Even temperature changes can create tiny differences. If you're building something based on this theorem, you need backup systems." The class listened intently. What had once been a source of terror was now eagerly anticipated. Jake's Deathworlder perspective had become essential to their understanding of practical science. After class, Jake walked across the quad with his usual companions. Pipsqueak rode on his shoulder, having discovered that Jake's steady gait was actually quite comfortable for a small creature. Buzz clicks flew alongside them, his rapid clicking now interpreted by other students as excitement rather than alarm. "Study session tonight?" Pipsqueak asked in his barely audible whisper. "Definitely," Jake replied. "I'm still struggling with that harmonious mathematics assignment. Those equations make no sense to me." Buzz clicks clicked rapidly. "Jake, you solved 3 impossible physics problems this week. How can math be difficult for you?" "Different kind of thinking," Jake said with a grin. "You guys approach math like music, all flowing and elegant. I approach it like engineering, all practical and sturdy. Sometimes your way is better." They passed a group of new students being given a campus tour. The tour guide, a crystalline being like Dean Vexthala, was pointing out various buildings when she spotted Jake. "And that is Jake Morrison," she announced proudly, "our first Deathworlder student and founder of the Applied Survival Physics program." The new students stared with fascination rather than fear. Word spread across the galaxy about the human who had revolutionized galactic education. Instead of running away, several of them waved. Jake waved back, causing Pipsqueak to giggle at the gentle motion. "Still weird being famous," he muttered. They entered the library, which had been significantly remodeled over the past few months. The furniture was now built to accommodate a wider range of species, from delicate flower-like beings to sturdy rock creatures. Jake's influence had forced the university to consider that different species had different needs. At their usual table, they found an unexpected addition to their study group. A large, armored creature sat carefully in a reinforced chair, reading from a tablet with surprising delicacy. "Hey, Stone," Jake said cheerfully. "How's the art history assignment going?" Stone looked up with multifaceted eyes. The Krillian was one of 3 new Deathworlder students who had arrived after Jake proved that his species could handle academic life. Despite looking like a walking tank, Stone was passionate about classical sculpture and poetry. "The assignment is fascinating," Stone rumbled in a voice like grinding boulders. "I never realized how much civilized art focuses on depicting peace and harmony. It makes me want to create something that shows the beauty of strength and endurance." Pipsqueak nodded enthusiastically. "I'd love to see Deathworlder art. It must be so different from what we're used to." As they studied together, Other students gradually joined their table. What had started as an empty space around the terrifying human had become the most popular study spot in the library. Jake's patient teaching style and unique problem-solving approach attracted students from every department. Dean Vexthala entered the library on her evening rounds and paused at the sight. 20 different species were clustered around Jake's table, working together on various assignments. The quiet human was helping a nervous jellyfish creature with physics, while simultaneously listening to Stone's poetry recitation and translating BuzzClick's rapid technical explanations for the other students. She thought back to the day she had approved his application, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her career. Now she knew it was the best decision she had ever made. Her tablet chimed with an incoming message. She glanced at it and smiled. The message was from Earth, from someone named Katie Morrison. "My brother Jake told me about your university." The message read, "I'm interested in applying to your new extreme engineering program. I have experience with underwater welding, high-altitude construction, and nuclear reactor maintenance. I hope that qualifies me for your aggressive academic advancement track." Dean Vexthala looked back at Jake, who was now demonstrating some kind of Earth calculation method using his fingers while his alien classmates watched in amazement. His sister sounded even more accomplished than he was. She activated her communication device. "Maintenance department, please prepare another reinforced dormitory room. And contact the structural engineering team. I think we're going to need stronger furniture." Across the library, Jake felt his phone buzz with a text message. He glanced at it and grinned. "Good news?" Pipsqueak asked. "The best," Jake replied. "My sister just got accepted. Katie's coming to study here next semester." The excited chatter from his study group filled the library. Stone was particularly interested in meeting another Deathworlder, while BuzzClicks was already planning welcome activities. As Jake looked around at his friends, he realized how much his life had changed. He had come to the university to study engineering. Instead, he had accidentally started a revolution in galactic education. Above the library entrance, workers were installing a new motto for the university. The crystal letters caught the light of the three suns as they spelled out the words Jake had spoken on his first day. "Where the impossible becomes probable." Jake Morrison had proven that Deathworlders were not monsters to be feared. They were survivors, adapters, and problem solvers who could thrive anywhere. And soon there would be more of them. The galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place.